First of all, thanks everybody for coming tonight. I know there's a lot of ice and slush and cold weather out there, so it's great to see a large crowd come out for this event. This is our first event of 2015. We are IoT Central, and this event is entitled "The Future of IoT: Looking into the Crystal Ball." For how many of you is this your first NYC IoT or IoT Central event? So show of hands. Okay, probably. Wow, at least I would say at least 60%. And how many of you were at the fair? So we had a big fair in December, by raise of hands. Okay, about 12, 15 people. So we had a fair in the beginning of December at the Digital Sandbox, in which 23 companies, all in the IoT space, demonstrated their products at tables, and it was like a trade fair style show, and we had 23 companies, as I said, and almost 500 people attended the fair. So it had a big showing, and we plan to do another one again this year. So if anybody's interested, just as a heads up, if anybody's interested in either showing product or getting involved in that kind of thing in the organizing side, let me know. Curious, how many people work at a startup or are working on a startup in the IoT field? That's a lot. That's maybe 40% of the crowd. And how many people work in a corporate entity, like something, larger company? Okay, another 20, 30%. All right, cool. So first of all, we're here in Dentons law firm, and Dentons is our host and sponsor, so I really want to thank them. And specifically, there were 3 people that were really instrumental in making this happen. They sponsored the place, this beautiful room and facilities, and the food, and we're really thankful to them for that. So David Papier, who is a partner in Dentons, Alton Delane, and Susan DeLava, who's the event coordinator. So I would like to call on David to come up and say a few words about Dentons.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Dentons. My name is David Papier. I'm a partner in the Corporate Venture Technology Group here at Dentons. We're excited to be partnering with Mitchell in the event tonight, and just from the turnout alone, looks like it'll be a great event. I want to again welcome everybody here. Dentons, for those who don't know, is actually, as about a week or so ago, the largest law firm in the world. We recently combined with the largest firm, with China, and that just from a size-wise, we are now will be the largest law firm in the world. Dentons is a full-service firm. We're in over 60 countries, 90 offices worldwide. I practice again in the corporate department area, where I'm representing emerging growth companies in the venture tech space, and assisting them in all facets of their needs, really from try to get involved early on since inception, since formation, and then helping them grow and mature, whether it's attracting capital and helping them work through that and accessing our clients who are VC funds or other institutional investors, working with them on their rounds of financing, helping them grow until a successful exit, either through M&A or through IPO. Our venture group practice has continually been ranked by Dow Jones in the top 10, and if there's anyone who would like to speak with me after the event, we're happy to do so. And again, excited to be partnering with Mitchell, and I'm sure it'll be a great event tonight. Again, welcome to everybody.
Thank you, David. And again, thanks to Dentons for sponsoring this event. I'd also, just like to preemptively thank our panelists, Ed Maguire, Alan Proithis, and Dan Ford, who I'll introduce in just a minute. And would like to thank the organizing committee, specifically Michael Wang and Bart Chappie, who are here. Bart is the one who's also doubling as a photographer, but he's also on the event planning committee. So the agenda is here. We did some networking. Now we're doing the intro, and I have a few slides to share with you. And then we'll do panel introduction. So each of the panelists will speak for about 5 minutes and share their view of the world, specifically around IoT. And then we'll go right into the panel discussion, and we'll have some Q&A from the audience at the end. Another thing is that we have in every event, we have member announcements. And member announcements are when you have 15 to 30 seconds to announce if you're looking for a job, or if you have jobs in your company and you're looking to hire, or if you are a consultant and you're looking to do industrial design, or for whatever, or you want to give away a car to the group, anything like that, that's the time to announce. So be thinking about what you want to announce between now and then. So IoT Central, this is the rebranded name for the NYC IoT Meetup. So IoT Central's mission is really to inspire, engage, and connect entrepreneurs, investors, professionals, and enthusiasts worldwide who are active in the Internet of Things. And we have a really wide range of participation, which is really thrilling. I mean, right now the group is over 1,900 members. We're almost hitting 2,000 members for the group, which makes it one of the 10 largest IoT-focused meetups in the world. So thank everybody for helping to make that happen. But we have people from various fields, from software developers, electrical engineers, industrial designers, user experience people, a whole range of fields, but also participants from a wide range of types of companies, from small, startups with 1 or 2 people doing something in a garage, all the way to medium-sized enterprises to large companies. We have service providers, VCs, very large range of participation in the group. We've had a lot of companies participate, and this doesn't even include the 23 companies that presented at the IoT Fair in December. But all of these companies have presented in our sessions, which we have had since the beginning, which was April of last year. So if you have a startup or a company you'd like to present in a future session, feel free to approach me or Michael or Bart, and we can find a way to integrate you into a future program. More on that later. We have several ways that you can keep in touch with us and also get involved. So first of all, Twitter, using the IoT Central hashtag or our Twitter account at IoT Central. You can go, if you haven't signed up through the Meetup site, feel free to register for our group at meetup.com/NYC IoT. I think that almost everybody has signed up through the group, but if you haven't, check it out there. It'll make sure that you get all the links to content. So we video this thanks to Jolly McPhee. We video these sessions, and Jolly is with the Internet Society, and we post those videos online. So if you have friends that want to see a video of a past event, or if you'd like to see one, you can access that online. That's at our YouTube channel, youtube.com/user/NYCIoT. And if you need to get in touch with me, my email is there. It's mitchell@iotcentral.co, not com, but .co. We have one really powerful tool in the group that is getting used more and more, and this is the email list. And it's a reflector with over 1,700 people that have elected to be on that list. So if you have a burning IoT question or you're looking for something specific in the community, that's the place to go. It's nyciot-list@meetup.com, and there's a lot of interesting content and opportunities flowing through there. So everybody who's a member of the group has access to that list. I see the cameras going up, so. Great. So without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce each of the panelists, and they'll present for about 5 minutes, and then we'll go into the panel discussion, and we'll go to Q&A. So first, I'd like to introduce Ed Maguire. And Ed Maguire is a senior analyst and managing director at CLSA Americas, covering the software industry, technology, and innovation. But Ed has really made his name as a person covering IoT in the last, as being really a pioneer in covering IoT from an analyst perspective. He has an illustrious background, including roles at Merrill Lynch, Technology Investment Banking, CIBC World Markets, and others. And he also organizes the IoT conference, which was, the last one was held just this last December here in New York, and is the author of numerous research briefs and his firm's annual IoT report. So, and on a personal note, Ed is also a musician who has and does perform a lot. He's a violinist as well as a master of other instruments. He composes music. So we're really lucky to have Ed here today. So without further ado, we'll have Ed present.
Great, fantastic. Thank you, Mitchell. I first met Mitchell last summer at, can you hear me okay? okay? Great. So as Mitchell mentioned, I'm an analyst with CLSA. CLSA is actually a Wall Street firm. We make our money by broking stocks, but one of the distinguishing aspects of CLSA is that we do a lot of thematic research. Clarence Chan, who was instrumental in helping to bring a lot of these reports to life, is actually sitting right over there. So feel free to introduce yourselves. I actually had written this piece back in September of last year, and anybody who is brave enough to ask a question today will get a free copy of this report. So I just wanted to throw that out there. But the reason that I titled it Deep Field was that I actually, as I started doing work on an annual innovation piece last year, I started looking at the Internet of Things, and the metaphor that came to mind was the Hubble Space Telescope. Actually, when they trained a camera on a black spot in the heavens about as big as a tennis ball from 100 meters away and just opened up the aperture for about 10 days, that's what they found. They found about 1,500 galaxies. And to me, that really, that is actually very similar to what we're seeing with the Internet of Things. The deeper you get into different industries, the more powerful the stories are. What I'll cover very quickly here is some of the converging forces around finance, technology, and adoption. But Matt Turk, who's a VC over at First Round Capital, has said that IoT is really reaching escape velocity right now, and I think that's a great term. When you see Uber, which is an IoT application valued at $40 billion, it's clearly we're clearly on the cusp of something big. So I'm going to leave the slides up here. I won't go through all the points here, but this is a big opportunity. There's a few different ways of sizing it. One is actually looking at the amount of value that gets created. Cisco, GE, and McKinsey throw out these multi-trillion-dollar numbers. Actually, the most significant number that is out there is Gartner's forecast for a little over $300 billion in incremental revenues in products and services that are going to be generated by 2020. Investors are always looking for ways to make money off incremental technology spend, but the point I want to make is that this is not the PC revolution chapter 2. There will be somewhere between $300 to $500 million in incremental technology spend by 2020 out of about 2.5 to 2.7 billion. A lot of that is going to be spent anyway, but it's the application, the technology itself that's really where the value gets created. There is an enormous amount of venture capital that's pouring into IoT. Somewhere between 10% of all VC investments right now are IoT related, and there were over $1 billion in deals reported in 2013. I haven't seen the 2014 numbers yet, but it's going to be big. A lot of M&A. It's also very important at the grassroots level to see what's happening with crowdsourcing. Indiegogo and Kickstarter really provide a way for people with ideas to market test them. And this is unprecedented, and I think you have the convergence of all these forces that are really going to drive an acceleration of certainly awareness and startup activity. When you talk about the technology forces, it's really the best estimate I'd heard was somewhere between 70 to 80% of the technology around Internet of Things is old technology. The rest is new. But really, this is sort of like, is it old wine in new bottles? Yeah, mostly, except you top it off with a little something new. But what's driving it is you've got a whole bunch of these factors that are converging. Hardware's getting cheaper. You have all sorts of open source software that you can use to build applications. You have these platforms in the report. We looked at a number of these sort of combined hardware, software, services platforms that users can, that developers can hack together projects really easily, and you combine this with some of the emerging technology standards like that are suited to low power networks. There's innovation actually on the networking side, even with machine to machine networks like Sigfox, which is a French startup that's actually using public spectrum over baby monitor spectrum. The rethinking of the architecture around networking is also changing the way companies and industries are thinking about how they architect solutions. Cisco has this concept called fog computing, where you actually are mirroring a lot of the architectures that were developed in industrial process control, where you actually push analytics to the edge. So this is critical. We are thinking about new ways to get intelligence closer to the edge, to have sort of real-time reaction to what's happening in the physical world. I would just highlight also that the Internet of Things doesn't exist in a vacuum. There are a number of other areas where innovations are starting to work together to drive new solutions. I mean, artificial intelligence, of course, cloud computing is incredibly cheap. Provides compute at our fingertips. 3D printing, additive manufacturing. There's a whole bunch of other interesting technologies, blockchain, which I think Dan could touch on, that are all really converging and driving acceleration of innovation. Here I'm just going to very quickly touch on the impact, because this is actually the bigger story from an analyst perspective. Yeah, these are new technologies that are enabling a whole generation of business models and use cases. But the reality is that the big impact is going to be felt in our daily lives, and it's going to be felt in industry and across different types of businesses. On the consumer side, it's already here. I mean, wearables is emerging as a major category. We've certainly seen the acceleration of fitness trackers. Paul Farkas, who's sitting there, runs is a real New York City thought leader on the wearable side. But the Apple Watch is really going to catalyze a lot of interest around that. Smart homes are actually a segment I think we're going to see some major innovations this year, really catalyzed by the fact that you've got the smartphone as your master remote. You got these automation hubs like Smart Things and Revolve, and then the standards wars that took place about 10 years ago have now converged around a couple of standards, Zigbee, Z-Wave, and you've got the big three: Google, Apple, and Samsung. GAS is the acronym. You're throwing gas on the fire here. The biggies are getting behind these technologies, so we'll start to see a lot more innovation there. On the commercial side, autos are really at the leading edge. I'd highlight Tesla as a company where the idea of using these connected products, where companies can see how users are using the product and the ability to collect data and then be able to push out updates is really cutting edge. You've heard a lot about jet engines and freight rail using connected solutions. That's where we're actually starting to see the proof of concepts working in the real world. Healthcare is another interesting area where you've got a whole range, everything from Mitchell had hosted an event a couple of months ago around some of the consumer-oriented healthcare technologies, as well as care for patients that have chronic conditions. But you also have stuff like these ingestibles. Proithis Health is a company that's making these pills that when you swallow it, it'll send a Wi-Fi signal to tell your doctor that you've actually been taking your medication. So enormous amount of innovation there. Retailers have been longtime adopters of advanced technology like RFID to track the supply chain, but beacons are, I think, what are getting people very, very excited right now about the idea of having much more personalized experiences. Cities are really test beds for a lot of enormous amount of innovation. We can talk about this lighting as a service and how disruptive that is a little later on. What Philips is doing in Washington, D.C., selling lumens as a service is really it's really important, even though it hasn't got an enormous amount of attention. And then the areas where I'm expecting to see the biggest impact are in what you call sort of traditional industries like energy, where you've got the big exploration companies have instrumented oil pipelines and exploration, but also when you get into distributed power, clean tech, and solar, there's some enormous innovations that are on tap there. Precision agriculture is another area where the idea that you can have more information about the soil, the weather, what are the appropriate crops to plant, how do you fertilize, when do you fertilize. Using this data to really create yield optimization solutions is causing companies like Monsanto to go out and spend almost $1 billion on a software company. I mean, that's got people scratching their heads who follow this sector, but this is an area that's ripe for transformation. And then lastly, manufacturing has been an area where, if you've been to a shop floor, only less than 15% of manufacturing shop floors actually have IP connections to some of their production equipment. So, we're really talking about like 1990s, maybe 1980s era technology for some of the well-known manufacturers. Then they're just starting to connect to the internet. They're connecting these operational technologies to internet. Deriving a lot more intelligence around their operations, and then they're able to pivot very quickly and be able to have new efficiencies, but also be much more flexible and creative. So, last point I want to make here is that it's my view that it's these new revenues, this idea of turning products into services and actually enabling sharing economy applications. That's the truly profound change that's going to come out of what we call the Internet of Things. You hear about cost reduction, fix things before they break. Risk management is like put a transponder on your car so you can prove to the insurance company that yes, you only drive grandma to the supermarket every Sunday. That's easy, but a Deloitte study actually identified that only about 10% of the use cases are these new revenues. So, my view is that over time we're going to see value created from platforms, applications, and analytics. And it feels a lot like the early days of enterprise applications. So the early days of Oracle and SAP are around again, and we're going to have a whole new set of new players. So that's our overview. And with that, I'd like to pass it next to Dan.
I'll do the introduction.
Okay, thank you.
All right. Okay, thank you. Great. Hey, thank you very much.
Awesome.
We'll see Ed back in a minute. So, next up, I'd like to introduce Alan Proithis of Wadio. Alan is the founder and president of Wadio, and prior to founding Wadio, Alan was most recently the head of InterDigital Solutions, where he was responsible for monetizing a $700 million 10-year R&D investment by taking commercially promising technologies to the marketplace. Prior to that, he led strategy and business development, consumer services at TE Connectivity Limited, and spent 7 years at Hewlett-Packard. At Hewlett-Packard, he ultimately led strategy and business development for their handheld business unit, where he was responsible for all strategic initiatives for mobile devices, software, and service, including the launch of HP's first mobile app store. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Alan Proithis.
Thanks, Mitchell. It's always great to talk about looking into a crystal ball. I feel like I should have a turban on with feathers and a large jewel in front just to have credibility, but we'll do the best we can bareheaded today. So it's great listening to Ed talk about his view of the market, and I've been saying that the people doing the best job at analyzing where we stand with IoT today are actually the people most closely connected to the financial community here in New York. And I would agree with actually most of what Ed said. I'm going to approach it from a little bit different perspective, though, versus someone who is sort of trying to make sense of all the craziness going on. And I was involved in the early days of the mobile industry 20 years ago. And when you look at how complex that was child's play compared to what we're seeing with the fragmentation, ecosystems, and dynamics and players going on in IoT. So that means it's a great opportunity for everybody in this room, because the more chaos, the more glory for the people that can figure it out. So with that, it's amazing how we both came to a lot of the same numbers. And whether you look at it in terms of revenue, that an entire new U.S. economy of economic value will be created in the next few years. I always joke there's a real war going on in the world today. It's a war of press releases about projections of IoT numbers. And whether you look at people like IDC predicting 25 billion, the Cisco and Ericsson 50 billion numbers, I think ABI is up to 75 billion, and just like I always joke about, people should get the URLs for the 10G, 20G, and 30G forums coming up in the escalation about that. The same thing's going on in IoT right now. So the numbers are big by any measure. But the bigger question is, how do you actually drill down past whatever big number you want to believe in units and dollars in a particular vertical application? What do you really do about that? I mean, it's like saying you're going to get 1% of economic value in China. It really doesn't help you to think of it in those terms. Just to put it in perspective, we are here. That's right now. And just to give us some context again, by 2017, what we call IoT will be bigger than the PC, tablet, and mobile markets combined. So if you need to just put a face on this thing, that's a big market. And the funny thing about that stat is that we're not even getting started yet for a few more years. So it's early, it's bigger than anything we could have imagined, and while short term, typically what happens when you make these projections is short term you fall behind the projections, and then long term you catch up and you pass them. We've seen this with almost every industry in the world. So to get back, and this is something Ed touched on, why do people deploy IoT solutions? And by the way, if you're a customer deploying an IoT solution, you're actually, in your head, you're not doing anything in IoT. You have a shipping problem. You have a cold chain problem. You have a watering problem. By the way, 70% of all drinkable water in the world is used for agriculture. And they estimate through precision agriculture, you could probably save 15 to 20% of that overnight just to start. Okay? They don't have an IoT problem, they have a water problem. Okay? And that's what I think it's important to keep in mind. So from a customer perspective, there's really only 3 reasons they're doing this stuff. One is to make money, the new revenue streams, products, and services. It's going to be, Ed described it as everything as a platform. I describe it as everything as a service. Uber, who could have predicted Uber 3 years ago? But you look at stats to say that 15% of potential use is where cars are at. Cars are only used 15% of the time. And that's where a company like Uber can come in and monetize and change a whole space. And you're going to see this business model repeated in every single mundane thing we haven't even thought of yet. So new products and services will be overwhelming and shocking. Save money, the efficiencies, the savings. I remember 20 years ago when you could first put some devices on trucks where you knew where some of the trucks were some of the time for the very first time. And overnight you saved 20% of the number of trucks you needed. And we've come a long way since then, but again, what we're seeing today is just getting started, especially when we get into cross-domain relationships and information. And then finally, regulatory compliance. People forget about this sometimes, but in simple things, like we have a customer we're working with that provides backup lighting systems for schools and offices. By law, have to be in a separate circuit. So you put in your small refrigerator with your backup battery, and you got to have Earl come by at a certain time. Yep, all the lights are on. Yep, it's sort of working. Yep, hit the test button. And if you don't do these simple things, you can get massive fines on a federal and state level. And there's infinite amount of these little regulatory things. If you're in the credit card business, PCI. Anyone know the length of a PCI report now to certify that you can run credit card transactions over your network? And if you can't pass the certification, you don't get to take credit cards. How does that impact your business model? That report now is up to 200 pages. You think M2M can help there? Because right now, it's even with the tools that are out there, it's a brutal, brutal process. So you're also going to see a lot in the regulatory area. But there's a big gap. If you're the poor company, been reading about this, you're like, IoT, that's great. I'll take 20 pounds of that. How do I get started? Who do you call? 911 or 911 or other? I mean, who do you call for IoT solutions? You're thinking you have a device out there. You have a device that's producing, collecting some type of data. And maybe you have a device management platform either you've built special for your particular hardware, or perhaps you're using one of the many commercial alternatives you can use out there. Okay? But, I was joking, there's a major executive who's done some interesting acquisitions in the space who actually is doing some really good stuff. But he keeps talking about Internet of Things is about the things, stupid. Well, that's like sort of saying that drills are about the drill bits. You only, buy drills to make holes, and you're only deploying things to get data. It's the only reason you're doing it. So I don't see data on here. So what happens? On the other side of the equation, it's data services. All the things you do to this data once you get your hands on it, which is no easy thing. So it starts with where do you put it? How do you put it? You're going to use a real-time database, semi-real-time, not real-time. Who else? What other data do we bring into this mix to make it better? Things like legacy data, things from partners, third parties, independent parties. How do you put in business logic and analytics, reporting, and then how do you share this with your partners, back-end IT, and all those types of things? All this is an integral part of what you have to do. And typically you don't think about it. And what people forget about, that there's a huge gap here you could fall over. And so what you have to do is you have to start one by one creating these linear relationships that are not just technical in nature with integration. People think about this in technology terms, so a lot of times you call it SI, and they're really good at this. But the problem is, with every technical touch point, there's a business negotiation. What are the terms of our arrangement? How much money do you give me or I give you under what conditions? How about indemnification? That's why it's great to have a firm like Denton, and thank you, Denton, for hosting us this evening. I mean, their skills, we all hate to admit this, but in today's complex world, what they do is an integral part. It's a foundational part to get any of the other parts working. And then finally, there's the legal negotiation to implement what you've agreed to technically in a business level. And you have to do this on a one-to-one basis for the most part when you go to do an IoT solution, which is why most of these solutions originally rolled out by very, very large companies who call a typical tier 1 integrator, back up a dump truck of money, and then do that once a week. So the whole reason that my company, What.io, exists is really to abstract this whole technology, business, and legal problem. Because guess what happens when you do this? You get scale. You might have heard of something called iTunes. What happens if you had to customize the business, the technical, and the legal integration every time you want to download an app on your smartphone? You probably wouldn't sell a whole lot of apps, would you? And then what if that integration and negotiation changed based on every other app you already downloaded on that phone? It's not an exact analogy. In fact, the Salesforce of IoT would be able to be a better analogy. But the point is that when you abstract the technical and legal business issues, you get massive scale and you get it very, very quickly. And that is, in essence, what my company is doing with What.io. In that for all those different things you have to do internally, we abstract that. So you can worry on the business problem that once that data hits our operating environment, you can very easily choose whatever you want to do with that data, whenever you want to do with it, without worrying about most of the integration work on a technical or a business level. So our whole focus has been on letting you go ahead and focus on what you know best with your business. So some people have said, well, couldn't I build that myself? Well, you could build your own relational database with the software you're deploying too, right? If you had enough time. You can go in the woods and saw down trees, make your own lumber for your new house. But you're not really deriving value from that particular activity. In fact, it's a distraction from the core business you're probably in. So we came out of stealth mode in October with some partners, some pretty big partners like ARM. So going forward, every IoT core that ARM licensee ships, which you might have heard of some of those, whether it's Qualcomm or Freescale or Atmel, or everybody in the ARM ecosystem has the opportunity to really potentially participate in our back end out of the box. We have opportunities like we're working on, we've deployed with people like Marvell with Canoma, which is their IoT fast prototyping device. Because the problem you have when you play with some of these devices like Arduino or other things is that you get this cool little package, but again, you're only playing with the package to get the data. What do you do with the data? So we've enabled people to be able to flow that data very easily and then actually do something with it extremely quickly to close that gap, to reduce that friction between the widgets you have to deploy and between actually getting real business value. So you'll see a lot more announcements coming out soon. And then the other part of some of the work we've done is really on web services adopters, and that while we believe the biggest opportunity is really in enterprise, industrial, really the stuff you don't see in the papers every day, it is important to have links to many, many other things. And this is just a sampling of some of the functionality we provide right out of the box. So you can use all these things not just as a destination, but actually as a source. So why do you care about this? So to get back to, for instance, a cold chain example, where you're trying to know if that burger on that truck has stayed frozen, okay, how long it's been on there, vibrations, how long was the door open? Because every franchise may have different criteria for how food is handled in the process. And we know once that burger goes above a certain temperature for an amount of time, it's not a throwaway time, but you know you have to eat that first because it's not going to last as long in the fridge now at Burger King. Okay? That kind of inventory management is massive, massive cost savings. And these adopters allow you to correlate data you may have from a delivery truck with data people are posting on Facebook. That burger tasted funny. Okay? Correlating that with the customer service call you just got saying, I think I had a funny burger. You know, being able to do that cross-source correlation, cross-domain insight is something we help enable. And we think that is going to be some of the biggest value of IoT we see over the coming years. So without any funny hats, I have to give you my IoT predictions, at least my top 3 for 2015. Since it was just Groundhog Day, I don't feel too late, even though it's February, giving this. So number 1, I think consumer wearables will get the press, but enterprises are going to get the money. And by that I mean you'll continue to read articles about how your fridge texts when you need milk and your robot jumps on your drone and flies to the corner store to get it. But they make for great articles. It's really not where the immediate value pool is. It's not to say there's not interesting things being done there, not to say there's not big profit pools there, but the bigger ones in the next couple of years, very much in the industrial enterprise side. It's implementing that precision agriculture. It's implementing energy applications. It's in your factory. It's in your retail. Okay, how do you reprogram that oven long distance when the menu changes? Because all those high school kids are going to burn all your food if you don't do it. It's things like that. Number 2 would be the evolution of language from technical to business. And I have a whole separate speech I gave last week in Miami at the M10 Evolution Conference about how language reflects opportunity. And if you think there's an infinite amount of terms describing what business are we actually in, by the way, is it Web of Things, Internet of Things, Internet of Everything, telematics, M2M, something else? Who knows what this is? Okay. The reason you're hearing about a big battle of languages is because the opportunity, the dollars are so big in this space. So you're going to see this battle of thought leadership being expressed in the way language is used and how people are trying to define the space to their advantage. And so that's going to continue this year. But just like when you go to buy a PC anymore, you're not buying it on gigahertz cycles and hard drives so much, or you're buying it based on use case. You're going to see this language tradition and much more business talk in 2015 as the space starts to get a little more mature. And then finally, to the language thing, is marketing budgets will win in the short term, but I think it's going to be success in the long term. So you continue to see the traditional large players, which are doing some interesting things, but they're trying to own the whole space and with their own terminology. And I think what you're going to see between now and the end of 2015 is that it's really hard to point to a lot of different real-life examples with real metrics around some of these impacts. And I think 2015, some of these stories will start to come out. And as a result of these stories, the successful ones will actually be the ones having a lot more influence on how we even talk and refer and think about this space. So those are my big predictions for this year. And I'll just leave you. I know it's not time yet, Mitchell, so I apologize up front. But I have 15 seconds for member topics. And I just want to say that we're growing so fast. We have a problem. We need more people. So we're actually looking for a marketing director in our New York City office here on 24th Street, and also a manager level in marketing. So if anyone would like to talk to me or can refer someone, very happy to have that chat. Thank you.
Great. Great. Hello? Great. Thanks, Alan. And we'll see you in a minute, too. So next up is Dr. Daniel Ford. Dr. Ford is Executive Director and Chief Scientist for Mobility and the Internet of Things for Dell Research in Santa Clara, California. Prior to joining Dell Research, Dr. Ford founded 2 startups and was with IBM Research in California and New York. While with IBM, Dr. Ford's research interests included, and this is a short but packed list, healthcare informatics, pandemic modeling, social networking, mobile computing, web search, and high-performance tertiary storage systems. Not a short list at all. His immediate research interests are focused on the Internet of Things, including software architectures, novel applications, data management, and unintended consequences. Dr. Ford has 28 issued U.S. patents and dozens of peer-reviewed publications. Without further ado, Dr. Dan Ford.
Thank you, Mitchell. Is this working? You can hear me? I can't believe I put that together. I'm going to go without slides. I'm going to talk command-ed. So my name is Daniel Ford. I'm lucky enough to work in a research lab. Mostly I get to do whatever I want to do. But I still have to answer lots of difficult questions like how is this going to make money? And fortunately, I've been able to kind of come up with some answers, and people are reasonably happy with what I do. So I know we probably want to move along in time, and I won't take a lot of it. I'll give you a couple of thoughts. I think in the Internet of Things,
it's very difficult to find a sweet spot. And I equate the IoT to being very much like the food industry, where you can find all sorts of interesting places, but it's very hard to say you've cornered the market on food, right? You could be growing coffee beans in Guatemala, you could be Starbucks. You're in the food industry, but they're very different. And I think the IoT is very much like that, where you have people who are very keen about the data and how it's going to move around. You have people who are flogging their processors as the next IoT processor. And then you've got people arguing religious wars over operating systems and protocols and things like that. I don't think any one of these things actually matters at all. I think they'll all be fairly well distributed. There'll be lots of Intel processors. There'll be a lot of ARM processors. There'll be lots of Linux. There'll be lots of other operating systems that people use. And in the end, it won't really matter that much. The data will flow, and that's pretty much what's most important. So in my mind, the IoT is really an intellectual property play. That if you're focused on trying to get your operating system or your protocol or your little connector to work and be the thing that's going to take over the planet, I don't think that's going to really happen. If you're concentrated on large ideas that are very general and will affect a lot of different things, and you're able to put together some patents on that, that's probably a good move. But that's going to be sort of a sweet spot for you, if there ever was one. You can sort of tell what I do in my day job. So, sort of back this up, I said that the only thing that really makes money is creativity, right? And that's really what you got to focus on in the IoT. Not taking some basic stuff and plugging it together and coming up with something everyone else is going to do. You're going to really have to look hard and deep at some problems. And I'll give you some examples of some things that I'm looking at. One of the problems that I'm really interested in is massive scalability. When I go inside Dell and I talk to people about what they're doing, there's actually Dell efforts internally. I was on a phone call this morning. It's kind of a marketing strategy call. I understand what they're doing. None of that stuff is really what I want to get deeply involved in, because they're turning the crank, producing stuff that eventually will hit a market. What I'm really interested in is a huge problem which will eventually become very strategic and very valuable. And that's, in my mind, one of them is scalability. How do we actually scale up to manage billions of devices? Right? Not a million, not 2 million, not 100 million, but billions of devices. All the cell phones in the world, or all of the smart meters in the world, all of these things combined. How would you actually communicate with those things? How would you make the infrastructure that would deal with that? Now, I've used this analogy many times, so it's kind of old to me, but basically, everybody hits the new war with the old weapons and the old strategies and the old technologies. Beginning of World War II, on Pearl Harbor Day, when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, U.S. Army had 2 divisions of cattle, right, of infantry. They had horses, and had about 19,000 horses and 3,500 mules, right? And that's what they went to war with. And, there was a whole mindset of people figuring that that was exactly what they needed to do. In the IoT world, I think the same thing's happening. You've got people who think, reasonably, that we're going to just need bigger data centers, and we're going to need fatter pipes, and we're going to have to come up with better protocols, and we'll just sort of take what we know today and use it just a little bit bigger, a little faster, a little more streamlined. And I think that's not really going to scale that well. So that's a problem I'm worried about. To take away the punchline, one of the solutions might be looking at something called a secure distributed transactional ledger, which is also known as a blockchain. And this is what underpins things like Bitcoin and Ethereum. So if you're in that space and you understand what's happening there, you sort of start to understand where massive scalability comes into it and how you can start to leverage that technology and actually not really even have a data center, right? Just completely think differently, go in a different direction. Right? So that's the kind of things I think are going to be where the new value in IoT is created. The other thing that we do, we spend time thinking about is, well, what are the implications of Internet of Things, right? What's really going to be different? And if you look at what's driving the IoT, in my opinion, it's basically incredibly fast processors which are being developed for smartphones. Right? If you look at Qualcomm Snapdragon or some of these other processors, when I was a graduate student, which wasn't that long ago, I would have loved to have had that processor. I mean, it would have just made my life so much better. And now, they're dollars, right? It costs dollars to do that. But it's still an amazingly powerful processor. And they're being cranked out by literally billions. And what you start to see is vast amounts of computing power being developed and integrated and pushed out into the world, all with great communications capabilities. And suddenly you have this computing platform made up of maybe billions of these devices, which is mostly just sitting there watching the temperature of hamburgers, right, or other things. Well, the old Raspberry Pi could support a Docker container, if that means anything to anybody. Latest Raspberry Pi, which was announced just recently, has 6 times the performance of the old guy, and it's still $35, right? So you start to put these things together, and you say, well, I could start to run Docker containers in the Internet of Things. What would that mean, and how would that play? So I look at things like the economic models of it. Like, could I start to participate in the open market for computation with IoT devices? Right? Because a lot of the dots that are necessary, a lot of the basic infrastructure is starting to come together. Right? Containerization technology, I can get into it later offline if you guys want to talk about it. Basically, something has come around in the last year and a half. It makes a difference. Right? The processes that are coming on from smartphones make a difference. The connectivity makes a difference. And now people are starting to see how you can start to integrate this stuff and actually make it work. And it's not just geeks and techies like me. Chicago Mercantile Exchange has come up now with a market for computation, right? So they're trying to define futures and options contracts on a basic unit of computation. Suddenly you have a marketplace. If you look at blockchain, suddenly you have currency, and you have scalability, and you have containerization, and you have fast processors. Suddenly, if you're looking at the data center, there's an alternative. Maybe if you're big into data centers, you should be aware of the fact that people are making processors outside of the data centers, and they could start to compete with the load that you think you've captured. And I think in the end, what's really going to happen is there's going to be a spectrum of computation, right? Big things in the data center that really need to be done quickly, fast, securely, and then sort of a spectrum of computation that's going to spread out into devices that are a little less capable, a little slower, but there will be a price difference. Right? You can render a frame for your animated feature film on a thermostat in Pakistan for 5 cents, or you could do it, in a data center for $20. $20 gets it, in 24 hours. The thermostat might take a month, but it was only 5 cents. And so depending on what your trade-off is and what you're going to do, you make your choice. And I think really what's happening in IoT is you're going to get that choice. So, I think I'm done. How's that?
Thank you very much, Dan Ford. So we're going to go right into the panel. I wanted to start out with the major, and we've addressed, I think some of you have addressed this in your talk, but what do you see as the major opportunity areas? I know Alan touched on industrial versus consumer IoT, but are there some specific segments that you think could be really interesting over the next 3 years and then maybe beyond that?
I think it's the ones that Ed put up as well around, they're not obvious or necessarily sexy, but they make a lot of money. Again, precision agriculture, energy, and energy too. I don't mean, there's information like from how to make your solar panels more efficient. But then there's, you look at places like Germany that I think are up to 20% residential generated power at this point, between solar and other things. And getting back to what Dan said, it creates whole new markets where you can buy and sell and trade on the information around this stuff, but also the stuff itself. And IoT enables all these different use cases. In fact, these businesses don't exist without it. I think you'll see things like that coming up.
I would just say that the smart home on the consumer side is
really. Can hear you.
Oh, can you hear me? Okay. Yeah. Anyway, I was the point I'd make, and I agree, and I do believe that the industrial opportunities are where the big value is going to come. It's just going to take longer. You were talking about a 3-year time frame. What's super interesting right now is at CES this year, Internet of Things with the Rage, and the confluence of all of these enabling technologies means that now you can develop a whole bunch of really creative, fun home products like a light that'll glow a different color when somebody in the family is within 5 minutes of home, or you can have a rice cooker that turns on automatically. But there's a book by David Rose, who's a professor up at the MIT Media Lab, called Enchanted Objects, which I highly recommend. I think there's we're going to see an enormous amount of creativity unleashed, and that's actually what I'm most excited about, and where I think the biggest opportunities are.
I sort of see it as, if I was going into business, I was doing a startup. I don't think I can pick one spot, right? There's no sweet spot, but I think I personally would be very afraid of the consumer space. Just to me, it looks like a honeypot. It's a place that is very attractive. I think a person like me, I would be very attracted to that. I would love the engineering. I'd have a fantastic idea. It would be great. Problem is, there'd be 25 other companies doing exactly the same thing, and I really wouldn't have a lot of scalability that would make a difference, unless I had some great intellectual property. I think in the industry side, there are many more opportunities for you to come up with something which does really well. I think you can focus in on a lot of domains and be a real killer in the domain, and then that will play out over time and however it does. I think if you're in heating and ventilation, air conditioning, and you really have a good domain expertise in that, and you're able to really do a fantastic job in that, I think the odds of you doing well are good. I love all the other areas, agriculture. I mean, to me, that's just really awesome. I think we have such inefficiencies that these, IoT can really make a big difference. I don't know if I'd personally go into it. I think that one's a hard one too, because there's a lot of big players. Caterpillar has a lot of IT in this area, Monsanto, and so on. So.
One quick point to expand on that. Flextronics actually is sort of at the tip of the spear. They see all the ideas as startups come to them and say, hey, can you create some sort of wired connected thing? And actually at our conference, was it you who mentioned they were talking to someone from Flextronics?
Yeah, so I was at a meetup. I actually live in New York, but of course I go to California. I was at a meetup in California like this, and there was a Flextronics VP talking about his job, and he described this one moment where over a 24-hour period, he had 3 different companies come to him with exactly the same product. And they all thought that they were going to get 100% of the market, right? And he's sitting there, poker-faced, right? He saw the first guys, that was easy. Second guys, it sounded pretty familiar. Third guys, something weird's going on. So, he had to price it as if these guys were going to capture 100% of the market. Not, right? He knew that they were not going to do that, and he just couldn't let on. And, it just really was dawned on me that these guys had excellent things, but they just were not going to make it in the market because there were just so many. And that really the only guy that was going to make it was, of course, Flextronics, right? It's a lot of basically gold miners and gold.
But that's the whole point of what we're doing too. I actually agree with that perspective in that if you look at Flextronics, it's a $25 billion company. It's amazing what they're doing. And if you look what they've done in the Valley, in Silicon Valley, they actually have converted their plants there to do optimized for short production runs, like 50 or 100 of different things. So they actually are facilitating that experimentation. And so it's just like blackjack. You're never going to win more hands, but they win more money by playing, getting in every game. And I think the people that figure out models that do that are the ones that are going to win big.
They're the house.
Yeah, exactly.
The house,
Yeah, I think, just to echo some of the consumer, I do agree with the comments around consumer. I mean, I was come from the consumer electronics industry, and I do think that, it is the major brands. It's creating a consumer product takes a lot more than coming up with a smart idea and a cool implementation. It takes scalability and a lot of brand power to make that happen. And oftentimes what happens is that a large company moves in with, a very similar solution or the same solution and with all their marketing might can step on a lot of the competitors. So it is interesting. I think it's probably a good topic for a future meetup. We could talk about that in the context of crowdfunding or other ways to. There are success stories, but it's definitely a difficult playground. So, one of the things that strikes me as being really interesting is that, and also in the context of meetups, we see a lot of activity around IoT meetups in Europe. I mean, it seems to be like all the rage. There's probably out of the top 10, several of them are in Europe, probably disproportionately represented. And it seems like, there are other areas like Asia as well, like in China, Chinese government has come out very strong on IoT. And sometimes, I get the feeling that, and maybe this is just a feeling that these other areas of the world, Europe and Asia, are putting more emphasis on IoT than we are here at home. And I'm curious how you guys see that. Maybe Ed, if you want to talk a bit about, what you see.
Yeah, I mean, I would say that Germany, for instance, has this initiative called Industry 4.0 that is, that's very much focused on helping manufacturers incorporate a lot of these new technologies. And as you mentioned, what's going on in China is, I mean, you do have a top-down economy where the Chinese government has incorporated Internet of Things as a priority in the most recent 5-year plan. I think a lot of the innovations are going to be driven by public sector in the U.S. We do have a few cities that are that are certainly leading the field, but also regionally in the U.S. I mean, I've been surprised as I've gotten into this, and Dan could probably talk about the differences between East Coast and West Coast, but I've been surprised to find out that there's a vibrant IoT community down in Research Triangle in Raleigh-Durham, because there is a testing lab, formerly a Verizon certification lab, where people can test wireless devices out. So I think there are going to be a lot of little pockets that pop up here in the U.S., but since we don't have any government initiatives here, it's a bit of a scrum.
I think it's a mixed bag. I mean, I spent a lot of time in Europe. I used to have an office in Shanghai. Very different places. I think with Europe, they're still in a bit of future shock. If you rewind the clock 5-6 years, Europe owned mobile. And then all of a sudden, we had the concept of cloud combining with mobile. And then Europe lost all mobile. And, pretty much Nokia disappeared. Who could imagine that? A lot of the other things going on. And I think what's going on in Europe right now is they're determined they're not going to miss the next thing. And so you see these pan-European and individual country initiatives like Horizon 2020, where they're throwing billions of euros, real money, at a time at these new initiatives to try to jumpstart these companies. The problem is the capital system there, and the fragmentation of the markets. They haven't. You realize there's over 200 telco operators just in Europe, because they won't let the consolidation happen at the right level on a country-to-country basis. And so that then drives an extremely fragmented ecosystem around all those countries, and also because of the cultural and capital reasons, becomes really hard to get funding. So I think you see a lot of really innovative experimentation in Europe, but you see a very rare jump from that experimentation, initial success level, to anything really meaningful. They almost have to open an office in the US, or they just quietly die. And China, I agree, especially in the smart city side in China. The problem with China for us is accessing it and us making money. Because there's no question China is going to do some incredible things in smart city and IoT. But what they do with all their domestic industries is they structure it in such a way that you may be able to participate as an outsider for a limited amount of time, but quite frankly, the IPR doesn't really help you there. Even if you have a technology that could help them, it'll be a very short-term thing. You can't monetize as an outsider in China very easily.
Plus, there's protectionism that's really started to kick in a big way around some of these security issues, and that's making it very difficult for U.S. companies to sell to China.
I mean, Qualcomm, for instance, is a poster child of, because MediaTek has eaten their lunch as part of policy to promote local businesses over foreigners. And now Qualcomm is not only seeing it in terms of trade policy, the investment that's gone into MediaTek and other chip companies in the Chinese ecosystem, and then look at just legal activities. They'll just decide you're now enemy of the state, and so you're under house arrest for the last few months, as the VP at Qualcomm has been. I don't know what the latest is over there, but it's been in the papers. So there's a whole different set of issues there to be successful.
And Dan, from a technology perspective, do you see...
Where do I begin? So I see two things about Europe. One, they're way ahead of us in adopting open source for Internet of Things. If you're familiar with the Eclipse Foundation, it's a big open source foundation. Their next big push is IoT, and they're heavily involved in that. If you look at who the committers are for all the projects, they're mostly based in Europe. France, Germany, Switzerland, various other places. They have a lot of forward thinking in adopting open source. On the flip side, I don't think they're going to have a big impact. I mean, I don't think their technology is going to have the impact that they would like, mostly because a lot of their stuff is top-down and runs at top-down speed. I was on a phone call this morning, and we were talking about some initiative that Dell was getting involved in Europe, and it had been approved, and this thing was going to happen, and things. That had started literally a year ago. and had taken 12 months to get to this point before anything had actually happened, right? I got into it a year ago. I was on calls, and we were trying to figure out what we were going to do with them. I mean, it just took forever for this to happen. So I see the technology coming out of Europe as being good. I'm a big proponent of open source. But I just don't see the VC market there. I don't see they think the government's going to pick the winners when they're investing in VC, which has been a horrible failure. I think China, I echo everything everybody said. I think the latest crackdowns they've done on filtering the internet and suppressing VPN, big mistake. USA has the most aggressive, fervent marketplace. Millions of these guys start up, right? Startups happen all the time. Most of them get their legs chopped off, but a few exist. And that's, I think, what was really going to drive a lot of this. Even if the US has a lot more proprietary software involved, even if there's things that are not quite the way we would like them to be, I think just the velocity of the marketplace and the velocity of startups is going to carry a lot of weight.
Cool. And in terms of the U.S., I mean, we see, Silicon Valley, Bay Area, Research Triangle Park was mentioned, Austin, Boston, New York City. Any other areas that are kind of hotbeds of IoT?
Minneapolis. Minneapolis is hot.
There was a guy from Miami at this, from the Miami community at a meetup I was at a couple of weeks ago too. So,
cool. So we see it popping up all over. Actually, I believe that New York City has a kind of unique place, being that we're here with a lot of major brands in different in a lot of different industries. I think that this actually becomes a very interesting Grand Central Station of technologies and businesses intersecting to find uses. So I think that that's my personal biased view living here in New York. In terms of technology, Dan, you mentioned about things going to the edge. I mean, that's what you were talking about, and I mean almost in a SETI-like kind of way, a SETI project kind of way that people would be accessing compute cycles on small devices.
Right.
What's the time frame? Do you see any time frame for that, or how do you see that evolving?
There's no technical barriers for it, so it can start to happen now. I think it's probably some evolution has to happen in cryptocurrencies where they become more mainstream. Probably some regulations have to be in place. I don't know what right now, but the thing about a cryptocurrency in this space is it allows you to automatically pay for things without middlemen, and to automatically resolve transfer transactions between devices and participate in markets. That's not quite here yet. Ethereum is sort of like a Bitcoin 2.0. It has a lot of interesting things in it, including a computational model, embedding virtual machine essentially into the mining process. That offers some opportunities for that, but that's not really released yet. They're targeting a couple months from now. The code works, so on, but it's probably going to be a while before people really feel comfortable in it. If that particular one gains acceptance, or something else would come out and replace it. So it's not happening next week.
Got it. And any other views on cloud versus edge?
I would just say that what we've seen out of Cisco and GE in particular. I mean, GE has designed their own software platform. I don't know how many people may be aware, but GE actually has a company called GE Software that's based out in San Ramon. It's in the Valley. They've rolled up about $1 billion in revenues, and they built their own software platform where there can be different instances that will run on a jet engine or on a locomotive. So you do have that you have that edge analytics where if there's a trigger, like if a temperature on a locomotive goes over a certain threshold, it can kick off a whole bunch of workflow, et cetera. I mean, that's the way that industrial process control systems have been architected. So in many respects, what we're seeing is this basic principle being applied to the range of information technologies. But you actually reminded me of a really interesting book, which it's a short read. It's on Kindle by Bruce Sterling, the sci-fi writer, or he writes a bunch of stuff, but called The Battle for the Internet of Things. I highly recommend it. It's he talks about RFID. The reason that RFID failed was because the Department of Defense tried to jam it down everybody's throat, and that was basically why people said, stuff it. We're not going to use it.
Except for Walmart, of course.
Yeah. Well, and they tried to. It was Walmart, and basically they tried to force it rather than allowing it. So, some great thoughts in there as well.
I see people looking up the book. It was Bruce Sterling, Sci-Fi Battle for the Internet of Things.
Bruce Sterling, The Battle for the Internet of Things.
Battle for the Internet.
If you all connect to me on LinkedIn, it's on my most recent book list.
He's not a sponsor of the Meetup yet.
I'm just really wondering about the cover art on that one.
I got it on my Kindle also. We can play show and tell after this.
So, and you know, one of the big issues that has come up, and it relates to this as well, is security and the recent FTC work. They came up with a report on IoT, and I'm sure that distributed computing brings in a whole new huge set of security concerns. Any thoughts on that? Are we getting to a point where we're getting reasonable security technologies or reasonable architectures in place, or is that far off?
People are very focused on it. I think, at least I hear it every single freaking day. Security. I've only been Dell just over a year and a bit, but I'm sort of figuring out the bits and pieces. They have a security company, SecureWorks, which makes appliances which do this stuff, and people envision that playing a role. I think not every place is going to have a super duper firewall in front of their refrigerator. It's going to be kind of hard to do that. I think everything that we've been doing in the PC space and the server space is doubly true for IoT. I think one of the problems is it's not going to be clear that your refrigerator is a spam bot, right? And as long as it's cooling your beer, what do you care? And I think that's going to be kind of a problem. That a lot of these devices will go out there that will be completely unsecure, and they will function in the place where they are in well enough or even superbly such that the person who owns them really doesn't care. They're not going to worry about putting a new patch into the operating system of their beer cooler, right? They're just going to get cool beer. And I think that's probably the biggest thing that's going to be a problem for the next little bit.
I want to make a quick point that a lot of the industrial systems that might be securing water systems or power plants are very vulnerable because a lot of them were designed to be standalone. They weren't designed to be connected to networks. And frankly, a lot of the people who designed these systems may not even be with companies or may not even be around anymore. So anybody who can reverse engineer these systems, if there's an actuator, if there's a bidirectional flow where you can hack in, there have been some hacks that have not been reported of municipal water systems and that sort of thing. It can get pretty scary, and there's not a lot of companies that are focusing on these industrial protocols because it's frankly. The documentation isn't standardized and you have to reverse engineer it. So whenever you look at retrofitting existing infrastructure, that opens up an enormous can of worms that's going to create a lot of opportunities for people who have the capability.
Am I the only one who thinks or just wonders why our nuclear power plants are connected to the internet? They're like, who thought that was a good idea? I sort of understand how it happens, right? But why isn't there somebody who goes back and says, wait a minute, why are we doing that? Can we just sort of put a air gap between all of this stuff that we're really worried about, and just let's not have hydroelectric plants on the internet.
Well, that was a Jack Bauer issue on 24 one season, I think. The big power plants access.
Well, there's also the hacking of the vice president's pacemaker.
Exactly.
Too,
I think the other thing you have to keep in mind too, and I agree with these points, but an IoT solution has many more links in the chain than any other solution in technology. And the more parties you have involved, the more complex it is to solve the security issue, and the more vulnerabilities you could possibly have in each one of those interfaces. So I think that's a fundamental issue that people are just starting to get their head around, because it's just so hard to get so many parties to all play the same way. I think the other thing, though, getting back to the government's comments, if you read those comments, they're pretty much all consumer-based comments. They really didn't cover the bigger part of the world. So I thought, first of all, it was extremely narrow-minded. And when I hear stuff like that, I'm like, oh, you're worried about consumers? Are you worried about the bazillion consumers that lost their credit cards at Target? Or the equal amount that lost them at Neiman Marcus? Or the Sony thing that just happened? They haven't solved the consumer problem for credit cards. And they're trying to say, put your foot in the brake of the biggest emerging industry in the world. I'm not saying it's not a problem, but I just don't see the solution coming from the FTC head.
there are thousands of security companies. If anybody's been to the RSA conference in San Francisco, there were it doubled. It took over the entire Moscone Center. I was blown away. I've been going for 12 years. So it's going to be, it's a great opportunity for creative entrepreneurs and technologists. So that's, lay that on the table. If anybody's a security expert, you have careers, definitely job security around security going forward.
Great. I'm curious in the audience, like how many people work in a company that is looking to integrate IoT into their workflow, business, product? Okay, so that's a good number of hands. I would ask the panel, like, what recommendations do you have, if any, for somebody who's in a small or medium enterprise or even a larger company that is trying to learn and find out about how to integrate IoT into their business and workflow?
I would start with the smallest possible piece that you can deploy and still have something you could call it's incremental value. I would start with the smallest sustainable chunk. Learn about it. Get smarter by doing, but don't try to boil the ocean out of the gate. Just too much risk, too much expense. Start small, learn, and then grow incrementally.
Dan, any ideas?
Yeah, I would say that's exactly it. There's, I was going to say you should measure twice, cut once, right? So I would look a lot. There's so low barriers to entry into the area that you're going to find a lot of companies which look plausible and have solutions. But it just makes it that much easier to find a loser, right? And they're not bad people. They're just not going to win in the marketplace. So I think instead of cutting twice, measure once, still too short, right? Look at the companies and decide what you can do, and then try to do the smallest thing.
We touched on it before. You touched on unintended consequences, and I think this is a favorite field of Dan.
Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that you'd like to relay?
Yeah. So I try to collect unintended consequences, kind of as a counterpart to the cheerleading that happens in the media about how wonderful things are going to be. My current tagline is, that everything, it used to be that everything could be digital, will be. In the IoT, everything that can be known will be, right? We're going to have sensors on everything. And you're going to know the tire pressure in your grandmother's golf cart in Alabama, and you're going to know the temperature at home, and you're going to know all sorts of other stuff. All of that has wonderful consequences. You could do things with it. But there's a whole flip side to that, which is going to be, I think something we really need to be aware of as just citizens of a free society. An example is self-driving cars, right? Has anyone ever read anything that was negative about a self-driving car? Really? Okay, one person, right? Yeah. So my favorite example about a self-driving car is, you have a library fine. You get into your car, your self-driving car, someone wrote a shell script, right, which looked up who had library fines and self-driving cars, did a match. The car doors lock, and it instantly takes you to the police station, right, so you can pay your fine. Now, that probably wasn't where you were thinking to go to pay $2.45, but, you miss your job interview, you do whatever. Those kind of things you never really hear about, that there's going to be some other kinds of downsides to this. So I have others.
Yeah. But people are still following their navigation on their Garmin or phone and driving into lakes, right? Turn left here, splash. So I mean, there's not a lot of common sense in some of these things. The other thing I would point out is that last I think it was in the fall, California had a minor earthquake, and Fitbit knew it before anybody because 1 million people woke up at the same time, and Fitbit could see all the data exactly, not just when the earthquake was, but the severity and how it radiated out. Because you could see where the people who woke up tailed off if you put all these points on a map. So you talk about unintended consequences, that's a very simple one, but because of the level of data, there'll be things that we learn that are great, and there'll be things that we learn not so great. And the problem is you won't be able to put walls around that until mistakes are made. It's going to be it'll be guess and check for a while in IoT.
I've got another one. Yeah. So I predict in the future you will not purchase cars. You will not buy cars. You will license them like you license anything else. And the reason for that is because of the data. So when you buy a car, pretty much the tire pressure and that information should be yours, right? There are startups in California right now who are working aggressively to extract that information from your car, transmit it at no cost to you, back to some other centralized place where they will then extract value from it. Should you object to that, that would affect the business model. And so I think what you'll see over time is the business model will migrate such that you don't actually own your car, you license it, and part of the license agreement is that all of the data that your car generates will become part of that.
Which is actually part of your license agreement with a lot of smart TVs, by the way. You ever look at the fine print with the camera that's looking at you and the audio? So on some manufacturers, they say they own all the data collected by that.
Right.
Read this fine print.
So maybe as a last question, before we go to some Q&A from the audience, what is, maybe each panelist could fill us in on what excites you the most, either what excites you the most about IoT or what drives you crazy the most, or both?
I'd have to say the the explosion of innovation in these seemingly moribund industries like manufacturing. I mean, in the Midwest, there's a rust belt where you've got all this. All these factories that are sitting idle, and these companies like Rockwell International and the automakers and Harley Davidson are finding new ways to really revitalize manufacturing, domestic manufacturing. And I'm actually very excited that there are ways that can create new economic activity, create a lot of jobs, where globalization is no longer about arbitrage for costs, but actually you get more sort of localized creation of value. And if you haven't read Jeremy Rifkin's book, The Zero Marginal Cost Society, I like bringing up books, but he does talk about this idea of very sort of localized and distributed energy production and also creation of goods. So the convergence of all these forces, what I talked about, robotics, 3D printing, et cetera, with the connectivity, I think is extraordinarily exciting, and it might just revitalize some of our Rust Belt cities.
So I have a hobby when I go to industry shows now. I see how many brochures I can collect with dog activity trackers. Because it seems like every show there's a new little thing you can put on Fluffy's collar to make sure that Fluffy is exercising, that's sleeping right. So I call it Fitbit for Fluffy industry. And Wall Street Journal just had an article a couple days ago about $15 million being invested in one of those companies. And when you look at it at the surface, it seems obscene. But then you take a step back and you say Americans are spending about over $400 million on Christmas gifts for pets at this point. And I think, to me, it's a metaphor to remind me that as much as the Fitbit for Fluffy thing drives me crazy, this is an IoT market for us. For a person trying to solve a problem, it's a very specific job to be done. And I think you're going to see thousands of these experiments over the next year or two. And it's both an opportunity for people who can figure it out, but I think you're probably going to see about a 90% failure rate on some of these experiments. And if you don't believe me, just take a walk around the wearable hall at CES next year.
I'm both awed and frightened by, I think, the same thing, which is just how vast the Internet of Things is. It's some fantastic opportunity for just about everybody who's really, trying to make a business, is technically savvy, marketing savvy, has the domain expertise. I mean, there's so many things that you can sort of bring to this game, and the game is ready for you to play. And I think that's a great opportunity. The thing that frightens me is just, well, what? What is it that you're going to do that's going to be a big game changer that 45 other people haven't thought of already? Like when I justify my existence to my boss, he said, well, what are you going to work on? It's like, I could work on protocols, I could work on processor, I could work on a whole bunch of stuff. And it takes a while to figure this out, to get into it. And I'm excited by sort of the lack of hindrance I have for things that are out there that are going to be new and exciting and interesting. And so that keeps me churning along.
Great, thank you very much. I think we'll go into Q&A first. We'll do about 7 minutes of Q&A, and if for people who have a question,
I wanted to call you for books.
Ed Maguire has very generously donated his book, Deep Field. Okay, so first question. All right.
so one of the comments was a lot of the opportunities in cost reduction. It was 70% versus maybe 10% on new income or new revenue streams. And so the question is, how do new entrants compete in that kind of field versus the incumbent suppliers who already, are in there with those customers, have those, those pieces. And there's some examples you might think of in some of the verticals that you've seen early success.
Yeah, all I would say is that there's let's come back to reading again, but Michael Porter of the Five Forces wrote the cover story in the Harvard Business Review in November with Jim Heppelman from PTC, and there's this idea of creating products that are enhanced with services. So you can buy, I could buy this stupid phone that could make phone calls, or if I have, services and apps, of course, the ability to create an ecosystem or services that enhance that make it better, does offer up opportunities for incumbents. Think about a thermostat, right? Stupid little piece of plastic that sits in your home, and then somebody from Nest comes up with this idea. Now there's some pretty sophisticated engineering behind it and design, but the idea is there's a service that gets connected, there's artificial intelligence in there. So when you start rethinking about, hey, listen, you go up against the big guys in that are creating mass market products can't move quickly. So if you have an idea, the beautiful thing about all of these enabling factors or forces right now is that if you're a startup, you have an idea. There's distribution, there's customers. Those are always issues. But if you do build a better mousetrap, you can instrument it with sensors, and you can also build cloud services like super cheap and have them run on AWS. So I think the barriers are really only imagination, and believe me, there's plenty of venture capital sloshing around there that's financing stuff that's pretty dumb as well. But you can crowdfund, with a great idea. Look at the guys from Canary, for instance, who were basically, Indiegogo and Kickstarter become a farm team for the sort of the top tier VCs who are looking at this. So I don't, incumbents are always there, but they always have a weak spot. They always have a blind spot, and I think that's where creativity is going to come in.
Not only is it classic Five Forces, it's classic lean startup. Steve Blank, lean startup, of getting very, very specific. You think about everything as a service, whether it's cars or Dollar Shave Club, or it's really everything as a service. You could pick the most mundane stuff, and it'll all be transitioned from a physical thing you own to a service you purchase based on your consumption level. So we help enable some of those things, so we're seeing a lot of the experimentation in the space. But I think it's a matter of getting really focused on and testing some of those niches.
So we've seen a proliferation of these hardware development toolkits. So obviously Arduino and Pi and Spark and Tessel and Pinocchio, and I'm sure there's a bunch of others. Do you see that fragmentation continuing, or do you think they'll consolidate at some point? We'll get like a dual platform more like we do with iOS and Android.
I don't see any forces that would make it converge. I think what you see is a low barrier to entry, that people can make these things and do it. I happened to run into, this was actually at EclipseCon last year, one of the guys who was on the Marvell. They just announced that, what was the name of that thing? Canoma. And I asked him about that. We're at lunch, and he said his company got bought because Marvell had a warehouse full of processors that were back level, and they had like millions of them. They didn't know how to move them. So they bought this startup to create a platform to move those processors out of their warehouse. When you have that kind of forces happening, no, there's just going to be this stuff flying out there.
I think it might be part of it, but 2 months ago, Canoma had a major Wall Street Journal article with pictures of Peter, who runs Canoma for Marvell. It was a major, 1/3 of a page Wall Street Journal article with just a few pages in. So I'm sure that was part of it, because all these guys can't get scale if they don't take the friction out between selling a widget and actually turning the data into something valuable. So I'm sure that's part of it, but they're using this as a vehicle. But you're going to see pure chaos getting worse through experimentation, and the market will ultimately determine who's the winner and who's the loser.
I'm partial to ARM and Linux. You know, I mean, I play with mostly beagle bones at the moment, just because it works fairly well. I'll abandon it tomorrow and move on to something else. But you know, I tend to gravitate towards open source just because it's a lot easier to deal with, and I tend to think over time it will be the answer. I like Linux and
So we're members of the All Scene Alliance, and we're huge supporters of open source. But at the same time, you know, if you look at the history of open source, Red Hat, very few people, they'll play with open source in a pure form, and when it comes time to go to commercial, they'll do it through somebody who's backing it up with support and all those good things. I mean, so you also sort of...
No, I was just going to say open source for infrastructure, proprietary applications, all it seems to be.
Nest is running 2.62 Linux kernel. Right? They were hit by the heart bug. They had to do a patch on openness. I mean, I stand by what I say.
Okay. Next question.
All right. Hello. I have a good question. What would be the starting point if you have an idea like Nest or Roost products? Let's say I have an idea that I want to implement or build a product. What would be the starting point for me to go, or let's say get funding, get designers, look for appropriate modules, or who do I need to reach out to, get appropriate advice? There are plenty of companies in the US and in India, for example, Texas Instruments or any other. What would be your advice to take the right path to build the correct product? Thank you.
I'll take that one. I think, first of all, I think that's a huge topic in and of itself, and we will plan to have an event around that topic that will be geared towards startups and ideas. But a few toolkits. I mean, first of all, platforms are very important, right? If you can leverage platforms, as in the previous question, that already exist, and you can build on top of those and put all the energy into implementing your creative idea without trying to reinvent the wheel, I think that's important. Second, as was also mentioned on the panel, I think if you look at funding sources, I think one aspect is really proving that you can get traction in the market. That's like a really critical part to get funding from angels, and even from angels and definitely from VCs. So you have new tools in the market like Indiegogo and Kickstarter, which are crowdfunding platforms that are not only there to help you raise money, but also to help show the investors that you have audience. And so once you do that, there are some really good articles on this about how some startups, put together crowdfunding campaigns, were able to raise some money, but more importantly, show that they had like 500 people or 1,000 people that were really interested in this product, and that were ready to either to buy it or to develop for it, et cetera. And then they were able to go to VCs and show that they had this traction and raise VC money. So I think that there are a lot of riffs on this. There are a lot of different variations of this story, but there are definitely new tools in the market, from fast prototyping, with 3D printing and other things, to leveraging existing platforms, to also leveraging crowdfunding and kind of new ways of raising money. But we'll definitely consider doing a program around that, and if you have specific inputs on that, we'll be glad to consider that.
Just don't be disheartened, because whatever you do is going to be wrong. Just so you know, just like whatever we do is wrong too. It's never. I'm not saying there's not parts that are right. You just have to sort of accept that up front and just try to get better, constantly improving, and you'll get there.
Startups are definitely about iterating. So.
Yeah.
I'm from the IEEE, and I think I'm a bull in the china shop here. Anyhow, I have a question. It's rather technical. All the data you were talking about, not all, most of it, will move over wirelessly. Now, I just wrote a paper in the IEEE. We have a tremendous pressure on the RF spectrum, and FCC comes along and so on. And I was writing on this radar spectrum. Now, there's a tremendous pressure to make some of the slots which are available for radar as a primary user. The ITU has demoted them to the secondary user. So if we go on increasing our devices, so one day what will happen, they will interfere with the radar spectrum. And that's, I think, a dangerous issue, because we have to fly over planes, bring them down, taxing them, and the newspaper reports, television reports, all the time. You see what's happening. The radar is used for disaster relief and so on and so forth. So are you also thinking of, the broad idea of how the data will communicate?
Do you think about the 70 centimeter band?
The what?
70 centimeter band. Radar has first use on 70 centimeters.
Yeah, but now you have 5G, 4G, and everybody will go there. But spectrum is fixed. We can't do anything about it.
Right.
So I personally see that there's a danger if we don't pay attention to the interference problems with the radar and maybe the other things too.
There's this concept in IoT of two kinds of devices. One are called chirpers, and they chirp, right? They don't have an IP stack. They take no responsibility for their data transmission. So they will emit data, and they don't know whether anybody receives it. And it's much like a bird just chirping. They don't know if another bird's hearing them. The other one, the other type I call burpers, because they will listen to these chirpers, aggregate their thing together, and then burp it back up. They have like an IP6 stack. They have full network connectivity, probably wired. You can create architectures where you would have a ratio between these two, where you would have RF being used in a relatively short, low power, short distance, low power area, which would be aggregated by these other, essentially their gateways. So you can design around that problem of basically RF pollution. You're right, in the fullness of, take it to extremes, you have all these things just spilling out of into the airwaves. Yeah, that would be a problem. But I think you can design around it if you appropriately think about it.
I think the simple rule you're going to see is, to that point, is that the denser the population and the busier the frequencies in a particular area, the shorter the hop will be for the wireless portion of the communication. And we sort of seeing this the way small cells, like if you look at the shared spectrum work that's been going on, the shared spectrum alliance that started last year with Google and Microsoft and a bunch of big players. Shared spectrum, in other words, more efficient use of existing spectrum is going to be the long-term solution in one part of it, but that's being actually delayed by small cells taking off and really just driving down, where that capacity can sit, you more fully using smaller areas. So I just think the denser the area you have the RF problem, the shorter the wireless hop will be, and the more you'll get to a gateway that's more of a wired connectivity.
I think there is a question, or there's an answer to that problem that actually comes down to the design of systems and how the data is handled, because not all the data, when people think of Internet of Things, they think of, there's a terabyte of data that comes off of a GE aircraft engine. The reality is, out of 400 different data types, there may be only 10 that are relevant to the people who are monitoring that for maintenance. So the more processing that takes place locally over BLE or Wi-Fi, and as Dan said, you have the burpers which transmit only that. There will need to be a design and prioritization of the data. That will have to be thought of. That will have to be a design principle for all these systems. And in a sense, it's getting away from the whole big data idea that you have Hadoop and you can just store everything and then you can sort through all of that data because you don't have selection bias, because in the past you had to decide what data you were going to store because the storage was expensive. Now we don't have that problem. I think this, it's a similar aspect with bandwidth won't be unlimited, but on the other hand, there's only a small subset of any data streams that are going to be relevant, and the filtering is probably just going to have to take place as close to the edge as possible.
If you want to talk to a shared spectrum expert, by the way, we have one sitting over here. Mike, put your hand up over here. Actually, has done a lot of work around the world with shared spectrum.
Okay, we have time for one more question. We'll take one from the back of the room, since we haven't heard from the back of the room.
I come from I do a lot of work in the mobile and telco space, and a lot of the telcos are very closely looking at the IoT space. In your opinion, what part do you think telcos will play in the IoT ecosystem?
Oh boy. I've only spent a couple decades working with telcos around the world. This is a tough question to answer, because people often say, well, shouldn't telcos pretty much own this space? And I say they should own this space, just like they should have owned social, mobile payments, app stores. I don't think it's a capability question, it's a culture question. That IoT will only succeed where people who are very successful building ecosystems because the number of players it takes to be successful in getting these things out there. So I think the operators have a very important role. Different ones are, they're culturally struggling to step beyond a connectivity transport approach in that they logically understand they have to be more than that, but it's a real mixed bag on how they're evolving to actually deal with the reality of that.
Any other comments? All right, so let's give a round of applause for the panel. We'll have just, I just have a couple of slides just to close out the meeting, and we'll do the member announcements in just a second. So this is your time. We have a microphone. If you are looking for a job, or your company has a job to offer, or you're looking for expertise in a certain area, or you want to give some kind of benefit to the group, or you have a startup and you need beta testers, now's your time. So 15 seconds each. Okay. Go.
Hi, I work for a healthcare software company, and I'm looking for some data scientists, data analysts to be joining my team to look at large volumes of data.
What's the name of your company?
Active Health Management.
And how
If you want to learn any more, come and find me. I have cards, and I can give you more information about it.
Your name is?
Paul Hurwitz.
Okay, great. So Active Health Management. Okay, next.
Hey guys, great news.
Thanks.
I'm from Amazon Web Services. We have an office here in Meetup. Big data analytics IoT. Great company to work with. Exciting use case if you want to work with petabyte scales and really tough problem.
So this is Roy Ben Alta from Amazon Web Services. Next. Who has the other microphone, by the way?
My name is Ajay, 440 Labs. We have an analytics service for IoT companies with data libraries for Arduino and Pi and Tessel and all these other kits you guys know, with like time series to back database and real-time dashboards. We're looking for early beta testers for companies who have analytics type problems. They want to build the service themselves and might actually want to form the product, that we can build the ideal product that you have in mind. I'll be right here afterwards, so just hit me up.
Company name?
440 Labs.
440 Labs. 440. How do people find you? What's the web address?
I'll just be here for like half an hour.
All right. That works. Websites also work.
Analog.
All right. Hallie.
Cool. Okay. I've been losing my voice, but it's okay right now. My name's Hallie. I have been helping organize IoT Central events since about November. And I wanted to share two things. One, I'm starting a blog/podcast to feature people in the New York City IoT community. So if you'd like to be interviewed, let's connect. And second of all, I'm looking to transition into a new role within the IoT space. I have a background with product marketing, product development, managing relationships with stakeholders, studied journalism and finance, and I actually love working with engineers. So even if you're not hiring, I'd love to connect and hear about what you're working on. Thanks. And I just want to plug Ed's book. I read it in December, and it is awesome. It covers the areas he spoke about at the beginning and highlights a lot of players to watch out for. So.
Yeah, a few more. So
yeah.
Great, thanks, Hallie. And yeah, just to mention, there are a few more, and I guess that if there aren't hard copies, there is a soft copy available with some. Yeah, so Ed has soft copies as well, if there aren't hard copies. Who's next? Okay, we have two over here.
My name is Lee Miller. I'm bringing a consumer electronics product to the marketplace called Kideo. You may have seen on Kickstarter. It allows you to remotely watch, control laser, play with your cat, and speak to, record video and photos, and dispense treats to your cat. So we have almost 3,000 pre-orders. We're coming to market in a few months, and scraping every room with the launch, thinking about the same stuff. And if anyone wants to speak to me for any reason,
Can you pass the microphone to the gentleman behind you, and then to the guy behind you? Yep.
Yeah, hi, my name's Steve Ramsey. I work for Microsoft to run the startup business in New York and Boston. If you have a startup and you're an IoT, come see. In terms of cloud, what money to spend, in terms of getting you guys enabled, so I'll be for sure what happened.
My name is Arthur. I'm a co-founder at Elemental Path. It's a smart toy company. So basically, we made this dinosaur that talks to with kids. And I'm looking for anyone who has kids and want to try our product or prototype.
How do people find you? What's your website?
Elementalpath.com, or just talk to me.
Or just come talk to me in person. Yes.
Hi, I'm Prue Ashby with London and Partners. I've just moved here from London. We've got some really exciting. Sorry, what's that?
I said welcome.
Thank you. We've got some really exciting things happening in IoT in London. We had that competition that was mentioned earlier. Next week, the Mayor of London is in New York. We've got a big tech event. We're showcasing some really cool companies from the UK, plus one of the winners of the IoT competition, which is an amazing security based cybersecurity solution that is advising the US government. So if you're interested in learning more, come and see me, please. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Any other announcements? That's it? Really?
And that's our job.
Yeah. One more, and then we're...
All right, I'll do the formal part for this. So we are looking for 2 marketing people right now, director of marketing and marketing manager. Again, this is very hands-on. This is not strategy. This is get stuff done because we have a lot to get done. So if you want to be in the middle of IoT and do some cool things, please give me a call.
My website?
WOT.io, WOT.io.
Great. One more thing, we have an initiative around a corporate council for IoT Central. If there are people that are employees of Fortune 500 companies that want to get together and discuss potential uses of IoT, we're working on something for March, so get in touch with me if you're interested in that. And then, this is a volunteer-driven organization, so we're interested in doing many more events in 2015, but it definitely needs the help. We have a great committee now, but we're also looking for additional people to help as an event chair. So if you'd like to chair an event, let's say you have a concept for an event, or even you want to implement something that we have an idea for, we'll support you on that, and we have all of the process around doing an event. We have a large group, so we have a lot of reach. IoT-related startups, if you'd like to present at a future event, come see me, or you can also see Michael Wang or Bart Shafi here. Michael, can you raise your hand? Or okay, Michael's right there in the back. Bart's right here with the camera. We did a demo event in December, which was our IoT fair. We'd like to do another one soon, but maybe probably mid-year or at the end of the year. So if you are a startup with interesting demos, come see us as well. And IoT subject matter experts. It seems like there are a few in the crowd tonight. So we're always looking for great speakers to lead a session and speak on a specific area. And if you have any suggestions, we're totally open to doing new events, and we want to continue to try to produce innovative events and serve the IoT community here in New York. So feel free to suggest anything. No idea is a crazy idea. And I think that concludes our meetup. If you need to get in touch with us, here is all the contact. And thank you all for attending.